I must say, I think I'm already getting a reputation. My unsweetened iced tea that the Turners gave me is running out, so it must be time for me to drive back to Richmond. As I considered what to talk about this morning, I was keenly aware that this is the culmination of days of sharing our stories with one another. While I know that what I have learned about you and this fellowship is just the beginning, I'm also aware that it is our stories that speak to the shape of our lives. Stories tell us about the quality and character of a life. Sometimes what seems unimportant as a good story can, in fact, be the situation, the act of courage that quietly shapes the lives of others. That is the profound nature of leadership, of being willing to do the right thing, even if it seems to be a very small act. One such story I will always remember was told to me by a widow about her husband. We were discussing what she wanted shared at Tom's memorial service, and this was the one story she wanted included. Tom and his wife moved to Montgomery, Alabama, where they were active UUs after a career in the military where Tom had served with distinction. He had been ill by the time I met him, but I knew that he had been appointed as head of the Alabama National Guard when George Wallace was governor. Many of us remember that time. Tom was called one day into the office of the governor, who said something like, "We are not going to let the University of Alabama be integrated. We will not allow federal troops onto the campus. I want you to bring your men armed and ready to resist." Tom said, "Yes, sir." Then he went back to the National Guard, the Alabama National Guard, and gathered his officers. He said to them, "The governor has ordered us to go to the university and to block the desegregation. He has ordered me to have all of us carry our weapons against the federal troops. When I joined the military, I took a sacred oath that I would never bear arms against my nation. I will carry my weapon, but it will be unloaded, and I invite all true Americans to follow my lead." That story still gives me chills. I was astounded and amazed to hear that story. For like many of us, I remember clearly those videos of that painfully tense day in our nation's history. And almost no one knew that many of the men standing there had their guns unloaded. They had them unloaded because one man led the way and, grounded in his faith, quietly bore witness to the transformation taking place in our nation. Sometimes acting on one's convictions means continuing to work even when others fail to see the importance of that work, fail to see that a transformation is just beginning to take place. Today is Earth Day, whose father was Dr. Eugene Odom of the University of Georgia. Dr. Odom pioneered the concept of an ecosystem. He published the book on ecology in 1953, Fundamentals of Ecology. In the late 1940s, Dr. Odom was in a faculty meeting that was drawing up the curriculum for the university, listing all the required courses for a biology major. He suggested that ecology be a required course. He was laughed out of the room. Later, other professors asked him, "What is ecology?" He realized then that what he was teaching lacked a fundamental textbook laying out the basic principles of the science. Long before Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, Odom was quietly working and publishing to help the world understand the importance of ecology and environmentalism. The first Earth Day began because of Dr. Odom. He kept working despite the fact that Earth Day was not established until April the 22nd, 1970. That was 30 years of work that gradually laid the foundation that enabled UUFC to be part of an international movement acting out of concern for our environment. Eugene Odom saw the importance of his commitment and continued to work even when for years others could not see the importance. Just as Odom and other visionaries through the ages have continued to work toward a new world, a world that sometimes only they could envision, so we are called to work toward our vision for UUFC, transforming the world one relationship at a time. Becoming a green sanctuary is one way UUFC is providing leadership for a new world. And this is a world that needs leaders grounded in a vision of the earth made fair and all its people one. A few months ago, I went to hear Eboo Patel speak. I don't know if any of you have heard him speak. He's one of my heroes. He's the author of, and you can write this down, Acts of Faith, the story of an American Muslim in the struggle for the soul of a generation. He talked about how essential it is for us to develop leadership skills so that we can engage more effectively in the world. One of the most essential leadership skills, one that Unitarian Universalists excel in, is helping people move beyond tolerance to pluralism. Embracing pluralism rather than tolerance as a worldview will help our nation and our world begin to engage in the discussions that must take place as we acknowledge our differences as well as our similarities. Perhaps the honoring of pluralism could help bring civility back into our public discourse. Pluralism, unlike tolerance, acknowledges that there are places where we will disagree and probably will always disagree, just as there are places where we hold similar beliefs and values. I believe UU congregations are one of the only places in this culture where we already assume that pluralism is not only possible, but a preferred way of being in community. As we participate in our UU communities, we are practicing how to disagree with respect for the other person's worth and dignity. I say this with the keen awareness that while we ideally wish to embrace diverse beliefs, we often act as if everyone else's beliefs are really like my own. Even as we stumble through uncomfortable interactions and bump up against the tightly held beliefs of others, we know that our ideal, our vision, is to build a faith community that embraces pluralism in spiritual, political, and theological beliefs. spiritual, political, and theological beliefs. That's hard for some of us. In some profound ways, we are in the vanguard of those who continue to be idealistic and who continue to affirm that peace is possible. We hold this commitment in spite of the fact that up close and personal, we understand democracy is a messy thing. We keep working on learning how to embrace the whole world, beginning here. We need to hold our mission, vision, and covenant before us as we engage in the work of this fellowship, for it is helping to save the world one decision, one work project at a time. It may seem slow, but that's the way love works. And that is why this is essential work for Unitarian Universalists. We can provide leadership as the world shifts and changes. We can help shape the language with which we engage diversity and pluralism. We do not and should not leave the shaping of the future to those whose agendas are not in the highest good of all people. Eboo Patel spoke of a tragic situation in Jersey City not long before September 11th, where there was a strong, vibrant Egyptian community of Muslims and Christians who had lived in the same area for years. Friendships had been built across religious lines, and there really was a vibrant sense of community. A tragedy struck when an elder in the Egyptian Christian community and his family were murdered in what appeared to be a gangland-style murder. The first person who spoke about the murders on the news was not a leader in the community, but someone with strongly held beliefs. On the news, with no basis in reality for the words he said, he remarked, "This looks like the kind of murder Muslims would do." Soon there were wild rumors that the murdered father, who had spoken out about community issues, had been stabbed through a cross tattooed on his wrist. As gossip, fear, and distrust spread, a once close Egyptian community became divided. Children and youth who had been best friends no longer ate lunch together at school. Fights broke out. It was heartbreaking. Where were the leaders who could have stood up to frame the tragedy in a way that their strengths and shared values were affirmed? Where was the person who could have said, "Violence happens in cities, but we are not going to let this destroy our community. Both our faiths affirm the value of human life, and we will stand together against those who choose violence over life. We are one community." What a difference could have been made in the midst of grief if their leaders had spoken to the strength that resided within that community. And I wonder, would we have spoken up? We know that as Unitarian Universalists, we are called to help set the framework for the future so that good can emerge from challenging situations, so that hope can be sustained and justice be found. Dr. Patel spoke of how important it is to find a common language among those who have different worldviews, even in the midst of a disagreement. we know different worldviews can be as close as a committee meeting at UUFC, or as far away as national and international negotiations. It is important to find ways of sharing and articulating our principles and values, sharing what we hold in our hearts. There are things that all human beings hold in their hearts. The wish for happiness, contentment, peace, love. Things all people long for. Perhaps it's time to move past what we grapple with to explore what gives us joy. Can we take some time to find beauty in the world? I remember hearing Coleman Barks, the translator of Rumi, talking about speaking before the national congressional body in Iran as one of those surreptitious emissaries of the United States to Iran. He was quite nervous, not for his safety, but he was worried about the reality that the leaders of Iran might feel he had not honorably translated Rumi. The poetry of Rumi is so powerful and profound. He said he read for a while, and then there in the halls of power, the elected officials began talking about and discussing different meanings of the words of Rumi's poetry. And Coleman Barks said, imagine if all governing bodies took the time to discuss poetry and beauty in the halls of decision-making. Perhaps then decisions might be different. Perhaps our world might be different. As we consider how we want to be together, I invite us to consider what kind of story we want to tell about ourselves 10 or 20 years from now. What are we waiting for? Who are we waiting for? The future is for us to create. The stories our children will tell are for us to create. What stories will they tell about how we lived and how we led the way? How we cared for the earth and for each other? I invite us to hear the words of an unknown Hopi elder. You have been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for the leader. Then he clasped his hands together, smiled, and said, this could be a good time. The time for the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Blessed be.